This is a nothing. Yes, did they play perfect? No, they still win. Yes.
What are you doing if the Celtics win the championship?
If the Celtics win championship, I might break my sobriety. I might act up.
We did it! You got him.
All the way.
Celtics versus Heat. Celtics in what?
4.
Celtics versus Knicks. Celtics in
4.
You got Celtics in 4?
Celtics.
Hell yeah.
Use a vocab word from a couple years ago. It's mind-boggling.
That's it, DRG. Let's go. What do you think for tonight?
You think I'm worried about the Warriors? I ain't worried about the
Let's go, baby. 18, baby. Load up the boat.
Why would you say that?
Because
I'm not. No,
recently he's putting up games like
above our head for the players.
literally right now.
But I think when Marcus, especially Marcus, when he got traded, I think that was a wake-up call.
You think right now
Rob,
it's still New York?
I do. And when I think of the Celtics dynasty, honestly, one of the first names that comes to my mind is actually Brad Stevens.
What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Celtics Talk Weekly postgame show. I'm your host, Seamus Zarlingo, and today we're going to be backtracking a little bit. We're going to talk about this Celtics versus Sixers matchup coming out of All-Star break, where the Boston Celtics win 124-104 on the Philadelphia 76ers home floor. The Boston Celtics coming out of 2025 All-Star break strong with a 20-point victory over the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, I want to disclaim in this live stream, we're going to talk about this game a little bit early on, but we are ultimately going to hone in specifically on the Philadelphia 76ers because although their record is just absolutely putrid at this point in time, they've been the conversation of the NBA for most of the season and for not good reasons whatsoever. And that's what we're really going to hone in on today. That's what we're going to talk about is the Philadelphia 76ers, mostly after this matchup between the Sixers and the Boston Celtics. But I do want to get into this game just a little bit. As you see atop the screen here, Peyton Pritchard on the night, 28 points, 4 assists. Didn't grab a rebound, didn't acclimate any other numbers out there, but he shot 10 of 18 from the floor, and from 3, Peyton Pritchard, he was quite efficient from the floor, 8 of 15. So Peyton Pritchard was getting it done from the floor in this game. He was the Celtics' leading scorer, but this was just an all-around great game by the Boston Celtics. Looking at it, Jaylen Brown, 20 points on the night. Jason Tatum notching a triple-double, 15 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists. Could have easily given him player spotlight on the night, but Peyton Pritchard, he was just a flamethrower off the bench. Al Horford getting a little bit of revenge Al Horford getting a little bit of a revenge against his former team. 11 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist for Al Horford. Shot 4 of 7 from the floor, 3 of 5 from 3, and then Kristaps Porzingis 17 points on the night, 4 rebounds, and assists for Kristaps. And so you had 6 players in double figures for the Celtics on the night. Derek White, I should mention too, 16 points, 10 rebounds, 2 assists. So Derek White, Kristaps Porzingis, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and of course Peyton Pritchard, your player spotlight on the top of the screen. They were all players who scored in double figures. Drew Holiday was nearly a player who scored in double figures as well. He had 8 points on the night, shot 3 of 6 from the floor. Much of the Celtics bench, he had Cornette, 6 points on the night. Sam Hauser only 3. Sam Hauser, not a great game for Sam Hauser whatsoever. Shot 1 of 6 from the floor. Cornette was actually 3 of 4, but only came out with 6 points. He played 17 minutes on the night. Torrey Craig got a little bit of a run, almost 9 minutes out there. Didn't record too many numbers. And then you saw Jordan Walsh, Kata Shireman come in near the end of the game there. But the Celtics, really just an all-around great game for the Boston Celtics coming out of All-Star break. They went ahead early, and we're going to look at the lead tracker real quick. See that one little dot of red in there for the Philadelphia 76ers. That was the only Sixers lead in the game. And you see the 2 lead changes there, one time tied, and the longest run was 9 for the Boston Celtics. But the biggest lead, 29 for the Boston Celtics, coming there late in the fourth quarter, early in the fourth quarter, late in the game, I should say. But a sea of green here as the Celtics continuously put it on the Philadelphia 76ers. They were up by, I believe, 16 at half in this one. And later on in the game, the Celtics just kept putting it on the Sixers. And you see that little dip there in the fourth quarter. That's really when the garbage crew came out there to clean up the garbage out there, and which was the Philadelphia 76ers on the night, because the Celtics just dominated this game throughout. And just going through more numbers for this specific matchup real quick, we see the Celtics out-rebounded the Philadelphia 76ers by 5 rebounds, 33 assists on the night for the Boston Celtics. That's really getting into an elite category of assists and playmaking for the Boston Celtics, because ultimately when you look at a team and passing to assists, you want to be up around that 25 assist mark on any given night. And when you're passing to over 30 assists, that's just when you're really sharing the ball. Really showed out in all of the individual stats as we just went through all the points for everybody. 6 players in double figures for the Boston Celtics. Could have been 7 with Drew Holiday and his 8 points as well, but 33 assists on the night. The ball was really moving for the Boston Celtics. And really what's surprising about this game is the fact the Celtics, they were dominated in the points in the paint category. Second chance points, Philly won 2, and the fast break points, Philadelphia came out on top. And really, you look at for this game, the Boston Celtics, the way they were able to dominate this matchup is really their great shooting and Philadelphia's poor shooting from beyond the arc. And I know 3-point shot, though, we talked about the 3-point shot. In terms of threes, people like to look at the threes and go, all right, Celtics made their threes. They won. Great. They win when they make their threes. Or, oh, the Celtics, they're missing a bunch of threes. Well, they lost. And I don't really like to look at the game necessarily that way, because there are a lot of other factors. But you really look at it in this game, that is one of the biggest factors ultimately, and what put the Celtics out in front of the Sixers is that 24 of 54 shooting from beyond the arc for the Celtics, 44.4%. And on the night, the Sixers, 8 of 39, 20% on the night. And then you just look at the Sixers, 0 blocks on the night. That's something that usually, you don't see too many blocks in a game. Celtics had 6. It's not really a stat people hone in on, but at the same time, doing the ticker a lot, down on the bottom of the screen, rarely do you see 0 blocks in a game. And the Sixers, that just kind of indicates not too much deterrence around the rim for the Philadelphia 76ers in this particular game. And just looking at some more numbers here, bench points. Now, bench points actually for the Boston Celtics, Peyton Pritchard, this is why you got to give him his props. I need to point over here. See those 28 points over here. 48 bench points for the Boston Celtics, aside from 28 from the Philadelphia 76ers in this game. The Celtics bench outscored the Philadelphia 76ers bench by 20. And Peyton Pritchard, of course, had a lot to do with that, 28 points on the night. But when you are really getting after it on the bench like that, that's when it can really that's when it can become a lopsided affair. And this is a game where you kind of look at the numbers and go, how did the Boston Celtics gain such a lead on the Philadelphia 76ers? It's really that 3-point shooting, the Sixers' lack of consistent offense, and just the Sixers not being able to really put out a cohesive unit on the floor there time and time again. So just looking at this game real quick, because I did want to talk about this game just a little bit before we really honed in on the Philadelphia 76ers. The Boston Celtics, they came out of All-Star break. This was a completely different vibe. And this is where I look at it and go, the Celtics, now this is going to be an obvious thing, but the Boston Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers, they're not even on the same level right now. Not even close. I mean, the Sixers, when we get into this conversation about the Sixers, this is a fall from grace for Philadelphia. It really is, because the Philadelphia 76ers, without Joel Embiid and Paul George a couple of weeks ago, were up 26 points on the Boston Celtics. 26. And in that game, the Boston Celtics eventually clawed their way back and came up with a valiant 26-point comeback. And it was eventually it was a 34-point turnaround. The Celtics ended up winning that game by 8, wound up winning that game by 8 in Philadelphia late. But Philadelphia, they were up 26 points, and that was without Joel Embiid. That was without Paul George. Tyrese Maxey played well early on in that game, but it was without their two best stars, right? The Philadelphia 76ers' two best stars. In that game, the Philadelphia 76ers played with energy, played with fight, played with grit, and they accumulated a 26-point lead on the Boston Celtics. Celtics came back because they had more talent. Celtics started to execute. Celtics played with motivation, played with energy, played with intensity themselves, in which they didn't do in the first half. The first half of that game, the Philadelphia 76ers wanted that game. The Boston Celtics didn't. In the second half, it was a much different story. The Sixers still wanted that game, but the Celtics wanted it just as much, and with more talent, the Celtics overcame the Sixers. In this game right here, this is what really is just the damning thing about Paul George and Joel Embiid is the Sixers have their two best players in the lineup, or I should say two best players at this point in time. And what happens? I mean, they're absolutely trounced by the Boston Celtics. And the Celtics are the team that's executing consistently, getting those consistent buckets on the offensive end of the floor, getting consistent stops. And meanwhile, the Sixers they just look slow. They look old. They look like they're out of energy. They look like that team who is ready to give up. And that's kind of the sad thing here about the Boston, or I shouldn't say the Boston Celtics, is the Celtics have got many happy things going on. The Philadelphia 76ers, this is the sad part about them, is the fact that when you don't have your two best players on the floor, the team looks more energetic. The team looks lively. The team looks like they want to actually go out there and play. With Paul George and Joel Embiid out on the floor, it looks like team's moving in mud. Team doesn't want to actually play out there. And that's just a huge detriment to the Philadelphia 76ers' two biggest stars. And that's really what we're going to get into the conversation of today is what is wrong with the Philadelphia 76ers and what is exactly the path for the Philadelphia 76ers to contend again? And is it even with Joel Embiid and Paul George on the roster? And I think the short answer to that, actually, real quick before we really get into everything, is no. No, I don't think they're going to be back in contention with these guys. But let's start out on this. Philadelphia is in just a very peculiar place right now. Very peculiar place with Joel Embiid and Paul George. Now, Philadelphia, they're on just a crazy losing streak at this point in time, and they're 15 plus games under 500. But forget this season, okay? Because I think a long time ago, this season was lost for the Philadelphia 76ers. I really do. You look at this, the way the Sixers started the season, they were down in the standings. They were right next to the Washington Wizards. They were ultimately 15th in the Eastern Conference for about 2 weeks before the Wizards just decided to lose a mass amount of games in a row. I believe the Wizards lost 16 straight games, and that's what put the Sixers finally above the Wizards in the standings. Otherwise, the Sixers were sitting down there with the Wizards the first 2, 3, 4 weeks of the season, the first month of the season. From that point, the season was done for the Philadelphia 76ers because now, if I want to pull out real quick, before the season, I went through and wrote something on every team and posted it on my page, Celtics.everyday. Go check it out on Instagram. I posted it on my page. And look, I had the Philadelphia 76ers. I must admit, I had the Philadelphia 76ers third in the East. Third, let me see here. I'm not mistaken. Sorry, I had them sixth. Okay, I originally had them third. I moved them down to sixth. So, all right, a little bit better for me here. A little reputation saving move down to sixth. But that's not even where the Sixers are going to end up this season. Here's what I wrote about the Philadelphia 76ers before the beginning of the season. The biggest questions, and I'm quoting this now. The biggest questions surrounding the Philadelphia 76ers is health followed by continuity. Since the Ben Simmons fiasco, Daryl Morey patiently waited to tear down the Philadelphia 76ers roster while staying competitive enough to keep Joel Embiid in good spirits in purpose of this exact moment and this exact season. So 24-25, we're here right now. With a completely new roster, the Sixers' own title hopes. That said, after adding Paul George in the 2024 offseason to pair alongside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, with two injury-prone superstars next to a still young ascending star leading the way, many question if the Philadelphia 76ers are in for the long run and can win 4 straight playoff rounds, despite owning one of the most talented rosters in the league. That's what I wrote about the Philadelphia 76ers before the start of the season. So the two biggest things there, it was health, it was continuity. And obviously, I went in and said, can you pair two injury-prone superstars next to a still ascending young star and expect success in the playoffs for 4 straight rounds specifically? Because the expectation for the Sixers coming into the season with Joel Embiid, essentially in the age bracket of the 30s, right? They're expecting championship, or at least to contend. There's no rebuilding or retooling around Joel Embiid right now. That was last season. That was the season before. After the whole James Harden fiasco, the many fiascos, many chapters of fiascos laced the Sixers' history. Most notably, Ben Simmons, James Harden as of late. But the two biggest questions around the Philadelphia 76ers, they were continuity and health. How many months are we into the season right now? How many? We're October, November, December, January, February. 5, almost 6 into March. Months into the season. 6 months. We haven't seen it yet, folks. We haven't seen it. We haven't seen the health. We haven't seen the continuity. And from the beginning of the season, it got off on completely the wrong foot. It was awful. Look at the first 2 weeks. Joel Embiid and Paul George didn't play. And for me, I give Paul George a little bit more leeway here. Because Paul George, he's an older player. He's had major injuries in the past, such as the most notable one being his broken leg at a USA exhibition game over 10 years ago. Paul George had the shoulder injury in 2019 that set him back. And before the season, the hyperextended knee injuries. We literally saw it on film. We saw these injuries on film, and it didn't look pretty. The preseason injury to Paul George did not look pretty whatsoever. You go back, it almost looks like a gruesome injury when the injury happens. That's where I give Paul George some leeway here, is the fact Paul George was actually injured coming into this season. And he couldn't have done anything to prevent it. It was a freak accident. He stepped his foot back and his leg went like that. I mean, what can you do? Hyperextended knee. He was playing basketball. Things happen. Injuries happen. Paul George deserves a little bit of leeway. Joel Embiid, I don't know. I don't know. To me, it seemed like he was fully healthy coming into the season. Went to the Olympics, looked healthy. But what happened from August in Paris to October at the start of the season in Philadelphia? What happened? Because Joel Embiid was fine in Paris. He was fine. And then to start the season, Joel Embiid's not fine. He's not fine to play. He's not ready to play out there on the floor. What exactly happened? What happened to Joel Embiid in that time to where he needed to sit out to start the season? And this is where Sixers fans became frustrated, is there was little timetable or little communication from the Philadelphia 76ers as to when Joel Embiid would be available, and Paul George at the start of the season. Two injury-prone superstars, they were thinking, at least in terms of Joel Embiid, because Paul George, he was already injured. We know he was injured. They're thinking, oh, Paul George isn't playing. Therefore, Joel Embiid, we need to save him for the playoffs. That came out early in the season. We're saving these guys for the playoffs. Well, folks, how are you saving guys? How are the Philadelphia 76ers saving guys for the playoffs if they can't even make it to that point? That's where the Sixers are right now. They're not going to make it to the playoffs. Or if they do, they're going to be a 7 or 8 seed, and they're going to be facing a much better team in round 1. Whether it's the Cavs, whether it's the Celtics, could be the Knicks. They sneak up. One of those three teams. The Philadelphia 76ers started the season out horrendously. Couldn't win games. They were 2-15 at one point. They were absolutely awful. Actually, don't quote me on that 2-15. They might have been a little bit better than that, but they were 15th in the Eastern Conference. Started the season out with 2 wins. And the Sixers early on, this was done early on. It was done because you have 2 players who are injury prone in your lineup, and you have a completely new roster. All right, completely new across the board. You go down. You had Joel Embiid paired up with Paul George. And you bring back Andre Drummond. And you have Caleb Barton there, who they eventually traded for Quentin Grimes later in the season. Jared McCain's a rookie. Eric Gordon is there. Kyle Lowry still fairly new to the Philadelphia 76ers system. All these guys are new. You need to be building continuity throughout a season in order to have success later on in the playoffs. The Sixers, first of all, their record to start the season put them in a tremendous hole to the point where if they just went 500, it would be a battle to get into the play-in. And the fact of the matter is, right now, is the Philadelphia 76ers, that's at the beginning of the season, that is one of the biggest things, ultimately, that I looked at and went, okay, how is this going to play out in favor of the Sixers? Okay, right now, the Sixers are, as of this recording, they are 2.5 games back of the 10 seed. Still, they're 12th. Okay, they're 12th in the East. 2.5 back, 2.5 back of that 10 seed. The beginning of the season, it seemed like the Sixers would maybe have to get to 36 wins, 36, 37 wins in order to make the play-in. At that point, the way the Sixers started the season, 15th in the East, way down in the standings, they were looking at an uphill battle to the point where they needed to go 500 in order to make the play-in. But we see the Philadelphia 76ers, despite actually still sitting on the precipice of the play-in, only 2.5 out. What gave anybody confidence the beginning of the season that the Sixers were going to see Paul George and Joel Embiid on the floor at the same time, and that the Sixers were going to go 500 the rest of the season? I certainly didn't see it. I certainly didn't see it. After the Sixers started out the season the way they did, and we're actually going to go real quick. Let's go pull up the Sixers. Let me go pull up their record here, because their record is actually going to be important to this conversation to start the season here. That's what I really need to hone in on is kind of the mathematical equation in which it was going to take for the Sixers to actually pull themselves out of where they were. Okay, so the Sixers started out the season 3-14. Okay, 3-14. At that point in the season, that was November 27th, 3-14. The Sixers, they needed to go at least 500, most likely, in order to make the play-in from there on out, because that was 17 games into the season. If we don't want to do a little bit of math here, real quick, let's see. So 17 games into the season. All right, well, let's get out the calculator here. Let's do the actual math. So 82 minus 17, so 65 games left, right? So 30, if you win half of those, right, it's about 32, 33 games. On top of the Sixers' 3 wins, right? So right now, that gets them to 36 wins, at least on November 27th. So if you're looking at the Sixers on November 27th, they're 3-14, 17 games into the season. 3-14. If you go 500 from there on out, you pick up about 32 or 33 wins. You add in those 3 wins, that's 36 wins. And what did I say? The Sixers are going to need about 36, 37 wins in order to make the play-in, because that's usually where the play-in is. You have teams around that 40 win mark, that 41 win mark, that 500 win mark, right? 500 winning percentage. The Sixers would likely need to be somewhere around that line. And you couldn't go as low as, say, 33, 32, 34 wins. You probably need to be more up 35 and above. That's where the Sixers needed to be in order to make the play-in. On November 27th, 3-14 at that record. The Sixers needed to go 500 and actually maybe even above 500. What made anybody think at that point in time Paul George and Joel Embiid would be on the floor consistently and would be able to muster up a 500 record for the Sixers? Because ultimately at that point, the Sixers were 11 games under 500. 11. 11 games under 500. Forget going 500. Forget going over 500 for the rest of the season. When you're 11 games under 500, you're a lottery team. You're an absolute lottery team at that point in time. And the Sixers dug themselves out that hole. And throughout the rest of the season, it's been a surprise when both Paul George and Joel Embiid play together. And both of these guys can't stay on the floor. They can't stay healthy. I mean, that's the gist of this. That's the gist of this season. This season was done a long time ago for the Philadelphia 76ers. And it was done when they were 3-14. It was done when they were 3-14. But that's not even my main point here with Paul George and Joel Embiid. My main point is the fact that Joel Embiid and Paul George ultimately own salaries that are just, I don't know where the Sixers go here. I really don't. Because these two players, I look at the Clippers this way too. The Clippers have two superstars who are just not reliable for 4 rounds. James Harden, Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard has knee issues. He can't be trusted to be healthy all 4 rounds, and I don't think he's the Kawhi Leonard from 2019 anymore. He played well last season, but then now starting out this season, Kawhi Leonard, he's out. He was out indefinitely due to his knee issue, and Kawhi Leonard, I would just say he's not where he once was as one of the top players in the league. I think that's easy to say at this point. James Harden, he's done a good job at taking over the role of being the superstar, and he's a different level, or I shouldn't say a different level, he's a different type of superstar than Kawhi Leonard. And one could even argue that James Harden isn't of that superstar status, but he's still a star, still an all-star this year, James Harden was. But both of those guys cannot be relied upon for 4 rounds to make a championship run. That's where you just look at the Clippers and go, great, whatever seed they are, 4, 5, 6 this year, they're not winning the title. They're just not. You can't rely on those superstars for 4 straight rounds. Joel Embiid and Paul George, they're in this category now. They are in this category. And I don't know where the Sixers go from here if they expect to compete for a title, because if you really look at it, the contracts of these players, this could not have worked out worse for the 76ers. And what's so hilarious about this is the fact the Philadelphia 76ers, they ultimately cleared their entire team last year, gutted their entire team, made the moves at the deadline in order to gut their roster last season to reset from what ultimately happened all the way back with Ben Simmons. Because the Ben Simmons thing, the 76ers were the first seed in 2021. First seed in the Eastern Conference. Nobody over Brooklyn at the time. We think about James Harden, Kevin Durant, Kyrie, how phenomenally talented that team was, especially on the offensive end of the floor. That Nets team, who could have won the championship in 2021 if it were not for their injuries. That team, they were actually second. The Nets team was second to the Philadelphia 76ers that year. The Sixers were the 1 seed with Ben Simmons, who was an all-defensive candidate, all-star, Sixers point guard, 6'10" guy who, of course, couldn't shoot. We all knew that. Couldn't shoot. But he was a valuable player in the league. Ben Simmons melts down in the playoffs, doesn't score in the 4th quarter of any game of the Hawks series. The Hawks, as a 5 seed, the Hawks as a 5 seed that year, took out the Philadelphia 76ers, came back from a 3-1 lead, and ultimately took home the series in 7 games. The Atlanta Hawks did. And the Sixers failed to close out the series on their home floor multiple times. The Hawks come up with a legendary win in that series. Ben Simmons with a notorious moment in Game 7 where wide open layup is right in front of him late in the 4th quarter, and he passes out of it. passes out of it. Sixers don't get a bucket. Hawks come back down the floor, get a bucket. Hawks eventually win game 7. Doc Rivers, Joel Embiid, they call out Ben Simmons after the game. And Ben Simmons, that's it for him in the Philadelphia 76ers. Ben Simmons goes on a tour of essentially needing other teams to trade for him, wanting other teams to trade for him. Nobody wants to trade for Ben Simmons because of what just happened, because he tanked his value in the playoffs from what he did, or rather what he didn't do in the playoffs. The Sixers tank his value because Doc Rivers at the time, head coach in Philadelphia, and Joel Embiid call Ben Simmons out in the postgame and make it known that they're not happy with Ben Simmons. They don't want to be playing with Ben Simmons. They don't think he's valuable to the franchise. And that was a misstep from the Sixers from the standpoint of Joel Embiid and Doc Rivers tanked Simmons's trade value as well as Simmons with his play. The whole organization tanked his trade value and then sat on it for an entire season. I shouldn't say an entire season because ultimately Ben Simmons was traded halfway through 21-22. The Sixers sat on Ben Simmons for an entire offseason, entire half of the season, waited, and miraculously landed James Harden, which at the time seemed like a good trade for the Sixers because James Harden was disgruntled in Brooklyn because of Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, that whole situation there. Kyrie Irving not playing consistently, taking time off, yada, yada, yada. That's a different story for a different day. But James Harden, disgruntled in Brooklyn. Ben Simmons, disgruntled in Philadelphia. Well, making nearly the same amount of money. Why don't we just swap our two players, is what the Sixers and the Nets said. And at that point in time, the Sixers were not fielding offers for Ben Simmons. They were looking for anything, and they would have kept Ben Simmons past the 2022 deadline if there was not an offer out there like James Harden. And that was a circumstantial trade. That was not the Nets going, we need Ben Simmons, we want him over James Harden. And that was not the Sixers going, we want James Harden over Ben Simmons. Now, the Sixers were happy to oblige, no doubt. But that was a circumstantial trade in which the Sixers, I'll take your disgruntled player. The Nets go, I'll take your disgruntled player. Simmons and Harden swapped for each other. And that really opens the door of the history for the Philadelphia 76ers to need a reset. Because after that moment in time, the Simmons fiasco caused 3-4 years of the Sixers needing to reset from that. Because the Sixers in 2022, they're defeated in the semifinals with James Harden by the Miami Heat, who were the first seed. And the Sixers go into the next season with James Harden, of course, and they're expecting to contend. Next year, it ends in another semifinals end, or rather defeat for the Philadelphia 76ers against the Boston Celtics in Game 7 at the TD Garden. Jason Tatum drops 51. Sixers up 3-2 in that series. Jason Tatum goes crazy in the fourth quarter of Game 6 to save the Celtics on the Sixers' home floor. Another occasion where the Philadelphia 76ers cannot close a game on their home floor. Cannot close out a series on their home floor. Jason Tatum goes crazy in the fourth quarter of that game. Sixers eliminated in Game 7 after Tatum drops 51. And the Sixers are looking at back-to-back years with James Harden where they go out in the semifinals and they don't get past the hump of making it to at least the Eastern Conference Finals with Joel Embiid, which is the minimalist expectation with the Sixers and Joel Embiid, one of the finest players of the generation, despite what's happening now. The Sixers, they're there with James Harden for 2 years after Ben Simmons and that circumstantial trade. They eventually trade James Harden to the Clippers. And from there on out, the Philadelphia 76ers are really in the business of stripping down the rest of the roster and essentially making room for this past offseason to sign a big free agent, sign other free agents on the market. That season last year was all about the Sixers stripping down the roster, getting rid of all the contracts with future money, allowing them to go elsewhere. not giving James Harden the extension, didn't want to give James Harden the extension. And that's a whole nother story, right? Which you kind of agree with at this point in time. You go, okay, James Harden, don't want to give him an extension. That's fine. Maybe didn't play out in maybe not the most ethical of ways not to give James Harden an extension after guaranteeing in words that he was going to get the extension and then pulling it away from him. James Harden took a pay cut ultimately in thinking that he was going to get that extension and really having that verbal agreement, which it didn't happen. So the Sixers kind of in the wrong there, but you still see why they didn't give him that extension because they wanted to go out and get Paul George. They wanted to go out and get a max free agent in the 2024 offseason. And the Sixers, they have 2 seasons with James Harden. One's half a season where they compete with him. They know they're not going anywhere because you throw in a superstar player halfway through the season. It's not exactly going to mesh early on like that. It's just not going to mesh the way you think halfway through the season. It's going to take time, right? You need a training camp. You need that ramp up in November, December, January to really hit your stride in February, March, April, going into the playoffs. When you're implementing a player in February, that time period is much shorter. You're thinking almost less than 40 games to implement a player like James Harden into the system. The Sixers, they're eliminated in the semifinals 2 years in a row. Can't get over the hump with James Harden. They're done with James Harden. Don't want to give him the extension. James Harden wants to go elsewhere. Sixers trade him to the Los Angeles Clippers. And that's the season in which the Sixers start to get rid of all their bigger contracts in order to go and sign a max free agent and other free agents in the offseason of 2024. Well, the offseason of 2024 comes around, and this is where the point in which I'm trying to make here with the Sixers is this could not have been working out worse because this is the season. This is the season in which the Philadelphia 76ers are supposed to be turning the corner from what just happened the last 3 seasons with Ben Simmons, his fiasco, James Harden, that eventual fiasco with his extension, getting rid of money, having to really play with James Harden just because Ben Simmons didn't work out. Those seasons of the past. So you have the first James Harden, the James Harden for Ben Simmons. Then you have you're eliminated in round 2 by the Boston Celtics, and then the third season you're tearing down the roster for this particular moment of the review of the Sixers. But then in this moment, 2024 offseason, this is where the Sixers go completely wrong. They signed Paul George to a 4-year deal in which includes a $56 million player option 4 seasons from now, 27-28. So in 27-28, Paul George has a $56 million player option. And before that, Paul George makes 49.2 this year, 51.6 in 25-26, 54.1 in 26-27, and then I mentioned a player option for 56.6 million in 27-28. So Paul George locked up for the next 4 years, over $50 million outside of this year, which is $49 million. Paul George is unfortunately not a $50 million player anymore. He's just not whatsoever. The Sixers went out this offseason and got themselves the wrong max free agent. Paul George, you kind of look at him right now and wonder, did the Clippers know something? Because a lot of people expected the Clippers to just swoop in and sign Paul George, extend him. New Intuit Dome, you're coming into the new arena. The Clippers, we want to keep together Paul George, Kawhi Leonard. You still have James Harden there. No, the Clippers, they went, we're good with Paul George. We're fine. We're not going to give him his money. You're free to walk elsewhere. And Paul George got the contract he did from the Philadelphia 76ers, and it makes you wonder, did the Los Angeles Clippers know something about Paul George? Did they know something about Paul George behind the scenes where they went, you know what? We're good. We're good on Paul George. You're good to walk. Because a lot of people were surprised by Paul George walking to the Philadelphia 76ers and the Los Angeles Clippers allowing him to do so. And now you look back at that transaction and go, maybe the Clippers were onto something. Maybe somebody within the Clippers organization or multiple people, they knew about Paul George being at this state of his NBA career, this stage of his NBA career, rather, where this season, Paul George, if you look at his numbers, so last year with the Los Angeles Clippers, 22.6 points per game, 5.2 rebounds per game, 3.5 assists per game, and he shot 47% from the field, 41% from three, and he took 16 attempts, or nearly 17 a game from the field. And then from three, he took about 8 attempts. This season, you look at those numbers, 16.4 points per game. So that's down 6 points per game nearly from last year. 6 points per game. Paul George scoring less so this year. 5.2 rebounds, the same, actually averaging more assists, 4.3 assists per game. But the 3-point percentage down nearly 6 percentage points, 35.8%, and he's taking one less three per game. 6.6. He's actually taking 1.3 less threes per game, Paul George is at this point in time, and he's making them at a clip 6 percentage points less than last season. That's not good. That's just straight up not good. He's taking 2.7 less shots this season, less field goal attempts, Paul George is. Yet he's hitting at a clip 4 percentage points lower, 43.2%. So you really look at those shooting marks for Paul George. He's going downhill. 6 points per game less. He's shooting less efficient on less shots. I mean, that is the huge thing here. He's taking less shots and shooting at a worse percentage. Theoretically, if you take less shots, your percentage should go up because the variance is actually in that particular situation. The variance for one's results is heightened or lowered in that scenario. But Paul George, he should be shooting at a higher percentage theoretically if he's taking less shots. He's taking less shots this season per game wise. He was taking 2.7 less field goal attempts, and from three he's taking one less three. He's shooting percentage points lower, 6 percentage points from three, 3 or 4 percentage points from the field. Paul George is. Yet Paul George is starting a new 4-year, $200 million contract with the Philadelphia 76ers. So the Sixers, right after they strip away their entire roster, go out and sign Paul George, who now is just, I don't know what you want to use the words of for this, but he's now a terrible contract. So the Sixers, they do all this work over the last couple of years to rid themselves of terrible deals, terrible contract, terrible money on their roster they don't want. And what do? They add it right back on with Paul George. Because Paul George is certainly not a player other teams want at this point in time. And the Sixers, there's no outs here. There's simply no outs other than maybe to shed cap later on in time. But in order to do that, the Philadelphia 76ers with Paul George are going to have to give up picks with Paul George in order to shed his money. And guess what? The Philadelphia 76ers have already done this with Al Horford years ago. Al Horford signed a new nearly max deal with the Philadelphia 76ers in 2019 when it just seemed like Al Horford, we were sitting there thinking in Celtic Nation, could he be $10, $15 million player? I think he should be more in that range. Philly was like, we're giving you 28, 29, 30 million. And they gave Al Horford just a crazy payday relative to what his talent was at that point in time. And Al Horford, I'm sure, is very appreciative of that contract looking back. But Philadelphia knew halfway through the season, this is a terrible deal. Terrible deal. Al Horford, Joel Embiid, they don't work well together. This team isn't working well. The 1926ers were a mess the year before they were the 1 seed, ironically. But Al Horford, the Philadelphia 76ers traded Al Horford in that offseason to the Oklahoma City Thunder and had to attach picks onto that deal. And one of those picks, guess what, folks? This is where the irony is going to come in yet again. One of those picks was the Philadelphia 76ers 2025 first round pick, protected within the top 6. And so we get to this season, right? And it seems like, oh, Sixers should be contending with Joel Embiid now. And almost said Al Horford. Nope, sorry, that's the Celtics. They're contending with Al Horford. Joel Embiid and Paul George. And that pick, it seemed like, oh, well, not that big of a deal. Could be in the 20s, could be the late 20s. Hopefully, if you're the Sixers, it's going to be pick number 30. You don't want it at all. Who cares? Well, now we get to a point where the Philadelphia 76ers are in the lottery. They are in the lottery as of today, right? Let's go to Tankathon real quick. Let's go to Tankathon. Shout out Tankathon, by the way, because just one of the best NBA and NFL draft I don't know, websites you want to say. Tankathon, everybody go check it out. Okay, so right now, Philadelphia, they are 6th. They are 6th. They are the 6th worst team in the league. 20-38. The Philadelphia 76ers are now. And I want to disclaim we're doing this broadcast a little bit after this game. So they were 20-35 on the bottom of the screen, but they're 20-38 now. That is 6th worst in the NBA. This is where things become interesting for the Philadelphia 76ers. If their pick falls in that bottom 6, where it is now, all right, and because of lottery, even though the Sixers aren't 6th right now, even though the Sixers are 6th, it could fall out of that range. You never know. And from that, the Sixers could be giving up a first-round pick this year that's in the lottery. A year from hell for the Philadelphia 76ers. They could be giving up their lottery pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder because they had to ship off of Al Horford's money back in 2021. Is that just not, or sorry, it was rather 2020. It happened late after the bubble. 2020, the Philadelphia 76ers make a deal where they ship out Al Horford to the Oklahoma City Thunder and their 2025 first-round pick, and which is protected 1 through 6. And now the Sixers are having a season from hell in 2024-25 and are right on the precipice of either giving up that pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder in the draft lottery, who the Oklahoma City Thunder are just stacked at this point in time as a team. They're just stacked. They still have picks on the horizon. Or the Philadelphia 76ers finish in the bottom 6, and they finish in that bottom 6 in terms of the lottery as well, and they retain their pick. This is why ultimately signing players to big deals, you gotta have the right guys. You gotta have the right guys, because not only does it hurt you from a basketball perspective and team building perspective, so it hurts you in multiple ways. Number one, on the basketball court alone, Paul George just not playing well, not really filling the role in which we thought he was supposed to fill with the Philadelphia 76ers. That one's obvious. Number two is the team building aspect. If $50 million is caked up in one player, in Paul George, well, how can you go out and allocate that? In terms of Paul George, right? You look at Paul George, he's not the player in which he's supposed to be. Well, if he's not filling that $50 million role, you can't make up for that signing other players, because a lot of the money that you would otherwise use to go and do that with is caked up in Paul George's contract. So you look at it and go, it hurts you from the on-court basketball perspective of just Paul George isn't playing well, but it also hurts you from the standpoint of the team cannot be filled out properly if Paul George isn't playing up to his standard out there on the court, and he's making this ginormous salary. Well, you can't make up for that, because all of the money in which you're supposed to make up for that with is in Paul George's contract. But the third way it also hurts you is the fact, if you want to get off that money, if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, you're going to have to find a team that's just low-key tanking, or just is fine taking on that money. Right now, it's just impossible because he has 4 years of it, and even next year he has 3 years of it. So you're probably stuck with Paul George here for at least the next 2 seasons if you're the Philadelphia 76ers. I think the only season that you could potentially see him moving, but see, even in 26-27, it's hard to see a team taking on 54.1 and then 56.6 the year after with the player option. It's hard to see that happening, especially with Paul George playing the way he is now. But the third way it really hurts you is that if you want to move off that money, you're going to have to attach picks to that money. And from that, the Sixers, we're seeing already what happened years ago. The ramifications of that are playing out years beyond that point. It's 2025. In 2020, the Philadelphia 76ers shipped off Al Horford's money and shipped off that 2025 first round pick. And guess what? 5 years later, it's biting the Sixers in the ass because this season, the Philadelphia 76ers are 20-38 and right on that line of, oh, it could fall in the bottom six, or, oh, it's going to fall just above that. Falls just above that, it's the Oklahoma City Thunder's pick. And wouldn't it just be hilarious if the Philadelphia 76ers somehow, some way, finished at the 7 spot and that was given to the Oklahoma City Thunder? That's a possibility. That's a possibility at this point in time. Otherwise, if it falls top 6, it goes to the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, that is the crazy aspect of all of this ultimately. And I just want to make sure real quick. I want to make sure that this is actually top 6 protected, because I know there's some stipulations here. So yes, 1 through 6 in 2025, 1 through 4 in 2026 if it doesn't convey. But this is ultimately where the Sixers still are in a bind with this. This pick is protected 1 through 6 this year between the Sixers and the Thunder, right? The Sixers pick is protected 1 through 6. Next year, if the pick is not conveyed, so even if the Sixers get a top 6 pick this year, they still owe a first round pick next year to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That'll be protected 1 through 4. And if the Sixers don't fall in the 1 through 4 range, that pick will go to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So even if the Sixers pick 1 through 6 this year, it's possible that pick still goes, or sorry, a first round pick still goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder next year. So the Sixers, this is why the Paul George signing is so terrible. On court, it's been terrible in terms of team building. It's going to hamper the Sixers for years to come, and potentially within the picks too. If the Sixers have to move off picks, that can really hurt you later on down the line. And then you're talking about things like this. In terms of the Paul George move, that's when it starts affecting a team potentially into the next decade. 29-30 is really when you're looking at the Sixers. It's like, all right, is that going to play a factor in them not being able to contend until even after that point? But this is also where you look at the Sixers messing up, is the fact Joel Embiid was given an extension in the offseason that clearly a loan too. So we talked about Paul George's contract, but it's arguable that Joel Embiid's contract is just as terrible. $51.4 million this year in 24-25. $55.2 million in 25-26. 57, so basically $58 million in 26-27. $62.6 million in 27-28. And Joel Embiid has a player option in which I imagine, I think he might pick it up. In 28-29, $67.3 million. 28-29, folks. That is 5 seasons from now. 4 seasons technically. Joel Embiid can't stay on the floor consistently right now in 24-25. What makes anybody think that in 28-29, all right, that just hear that. It's 2024-25 is the season right now. In 2028-29, Joel Embiid will be making $67 million. Joel Embiid can't stay on the floor healthy right now. And I think it's to a point where I'm looking at Joel Embiid going, this might be over. This might be over. Hey, MVP 2 seasons ago, dominant season And you could say, Nikola Jokic, he really should have 4 straight MVPs right now and working on a 5th. Because that was some media hype behind Joel Embiid that 23 season. Who really wanted the MVP, basically gave it to him. Joel Embiid, these big guys go fast. Yao Ming, he was out of the league instantly after a foot issue, almost instantly. Andrew Bynum, multiple knee issues, out of the league instantly. Shaq, it felt like Shaq, and he was a legitimate player, a dominant player with the Miami Heat. And after that, Phoenix Suns, Cleveland Cavs, Boston Celtics, didn't work out of the league. These big guys can go fast. Now, Shaq, of course, is kind of a different situation because he did have a little bit more longevity. Greg Oden. I mean, Greg Oden, look at him in his NBA career. Never really got off the ground. And he's a really big what-if story because he was a dominant player in college. And a lot of people thought he was going to be a dominant player in the NBA, but knee issues hampered his NBA career. He's out of the league pretty much after 2, 3, 4 seasons. These big guys with foot issues, with knee issues, with any joint or ligament issues, 7-foot guys who move the way they do out there on the floor on an NBA court, it's superhuman stuff. All right, it's supernatural stuff. It's something out of just a different type of nature. It really is. These guys who are 7 foot, the guys who are in the mid range of the 6-foot category, 6'5", 6'6", and above, to move as fluidly as they do with the amount of weight on their body, with their height, it's superhuman stuff. Joel Embiid is, don't get me wrong, Joel Embiid is a superhuman. But those superhuman strengths, they take a toll on a player's body, a person's body over time. And when those injuries arise, they are covering up something that over time, it's hard to cover up when you are a superhuman with superhuman-like abilities and you're expected to give those out every single night on a basketball floor. Because say, if you do have a foot issue or a knee issue, it's not something that ultimately is just going to be fine and heal. It's going to have to heal and take the bearing, the brunt of the force that comes with being a 7-foot giant on an NBA floor who runs up and down the floor every single night. Constant bouncing, constant dunking, constant jumping up into the air, trying to deter shots. The constant moving back and forth laterally, horizontally. And so Joel Embiid, I just look at it right. You will not believe the notification that just came up. That is crazy. That is absolutely crazy, folks. Look, it says right now. This ain't no screenshot. It says right now. Look. Right now. Right now. Look at that. Wow. As we're talking about Joel Embiid, as we are talking about Joel Embiid on this live stream, Joel Embiid out for the season to rehab left knee. Wow. 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 Okay, so that was actually 40 minutes ago, but I just got the real GM notification. But we did have an official Shams Charania tweet on here too. Wait, let me get it up here on the screen. Wow. Wow. Well, here you go. Here you go, folks. Let's do it on the iPad. Oh, okay. All right. Look at that. That is crazy. That is crazy, folks. I'm sorry. That is like this is crazier than some of the trade deadline stuff that has happened on this broadcast. That is insane. This was not planned. I swear I have no information. This was not planned. We're on this live stream talking about Joel Embiid, his knee injuries, and of course, he is now out for the season as of of February 28th. So Joel Embiid doesn't even make it to March, and he's out for the season to rehab his left knee. And that was kind of the conversation I was going to get into, is the fact that the Sixers, they're probably close to shutting down both Paul George and Joel Embiid at this point in the season, because if you look at where they are in the draft standings right now, the Sixers want to be in that comfortable bottom 3 or bottom 4 in order to not convey their pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder. They want a top draft pick after the season they're having right now. And if they somehow fall out of that top 6, the Sixers, what was the season for? It was a completely lost season, even without your pick if you're the Philadelphia 76ers. So this makes sense. Keith Pompey, who is a prominent Philadelphia 76ers writer, uh, certainly holding down the media game for the Sixers, really for the last decade, feels like now. Keith Pompey's been there in Philadelphia. He mentioned, I believe he was talking to A. Sherrod Blakely. He was talking with A. Sherrod Blakely, that Boston guy. So A. Sherrod, Boston guy. Keith Pompey, Philadelphia guy. All right. Keith Pompey was talking about how the Sixers, it seems as if a shutdown may appear imminent just because of the Sixers' record right now, and also the way everything was going in terms of Paul George and Joel Embiid. They're out, they're in, they're out, they're in. And I forgot exactly what he said that made him think that the shutdown was imminent, because apparently the Sixers gave out some sort of injury report that um, kind of indicated that maybe potentially these two guys were going to be shut down soon. And now we see the first domino fall. Joel Embiid out for the season, rehabbing his left knee, out for the season. So the Sixers are in full tank mode officially. No more Joel Embiid for this season. We'll see how long Paul George lasts. But we were on the topic of Joel Embiid just honestly being done. I had 67 million later on in time, 4 seasons from now. Joel Embiid, I don't see how this gets any better. Last year in the Olympics, he seemed to be fine. He seemed to be completely fine, and he was dealing with injuries going into the playoffs last year, played through them, seemed to be fine by the Olympics, and then came into this season and didn't play right away. And it seemed like it was because he was matching Paul George being out, and the Sixers wanted to kind of, I don't want to say they saw, oh, Paul George is out. Well, why does Joel Embiid need to play with everybody else? We want to have him a next alongside Paul George. And from that, I see it as, well, the Sixers, from that perspective, sat Joel Embiid to start the season, but then you quickly realize this isn't just Joel Embiid sitting. He's actually not healthy. He came out onto the floor not in shape, not healthy. I mean, it was a rough go for Joel Embiid early on. He just did not look like the same dominant player, and he didn't keep that same dominance that we saw in the past throughout any portion of this season. And anytime him and Paul George were on the floor, just the Sixers didn't look like the way they were supposed to look with those two players, and how dominant they've been in the past. And that's where I look at, so yeah, Joel Embiid missed 39 of 58 games this season. 39 of 58 games he was eligible to be available for this year. 39. So he played, what, 18, 19 games this season? So Joel Embiid, 19 games this year. I don't see how this is getting any better, because Joel Embiid was out for a grand portion of the season, 39 of 58 games so far. And Joel Embiid will also disclaim this too. Sixers are on a 9-game losing streak, so I guess the 9-game losing streak just get Joel out of there. We tried to win with Joel and Paul George with PG. Get him out of there. 9-game winning streak, losing streak. 9-game winning streak for the Sixers opponents. Get him out of there. Get him out of there. But I don't see how this gets any better for Joel Embiid to make this contract extension better, because the Sixers didn't have to extend Joel Embiid, and yet they did. And I understand making your superstars happy, but the Sixers extended an unhealthy superstar in Joel Embiid. And this is what you look at in Dallas and go, okay, well, maybe there were concerns for Luka's health behind the scenes that really put the Mavericks in a position of not wanting to pay Luka $345 million after this year and give Luka the extension, because the Sixers essentially did that with Joel Embiid, and they knew the history of Joel Embiid's history medically is much longer than Luka Doncic's history. And so it makes the Luka thing a little bit more shocking, especially what's happened with Joel Embiid and Zion Williamson just getting any money they want, essentially, despite never really playing consistently. And Joel Embiid, these concerns were known with Joel Embiid. The Sixers still gave him the contract they gave him, and now it looks absolutely horrendous because Joel Embiid, I don't see. Does anybody see him playing consistently ever again? He came into the season saying he's not going to play back to backs. Something was clearly wrong with him not being healthy this year. We have no idea what happened in training camp or before anything where Joel Embiid needed to sit out, because he seemed completely fine in the Olympics, didn't play any basketball for 2 months, then came into the season unhealthy. Nobody knows. I mean, could have easily been a run where something goes wrong, or any time he's practicing out there on the floor. It doesn't have to be an in-game situation necessarily. But Joel Embiid came into the season unhealthy, and now he's past the age of 30. Has the clock expired with Joel Embiid at this point, where we're looking at him going, he's past the age of 30. He has knee issues. He can't play consistently. He doesn't look like the same player out there whatsoever. That's also the gist of both Paul George and Joel Embiid. They don't look like the same players, on top of not being consistently available. The best ability in basketball is simply availability. But then when you don't have that, plus you don't have, when you're available, the star power in which we saw in the past from Paul George and Joel Embiid, this just makes a mess of a situation on top of both of their contracts right now. The Sixers really got themselves out of all that Tobias Harris money, got themselves out of the money of the past, and now they just put themselves right back into the same situation where they have two players who other teams don't want whatsoever, because why would you want Joel Embiid if you're another team? And the Knicks are looking at the situation they have up in New York right now going, we traded for Karl Anthony Towns. We were willing to give up the same package, if not more, for Joel Embiid. That was where the Knicks were this offseason. They could have made a run at Joel Embiid with the same package that eventually netted them Karl Anthony Towns. And Karl Anthony Towns, he's working like a glove up in New York. I mean, he's fitting like a glove, I should say. And Joel Embiid, this is what the Knicks ultimately dodged the bullet from. Joel Embiid playing 39 of 58 games, not being out there whatsoever. And when he is out there, he's not the same effective big man as he was before. Just simply not the same effective big man. And that's where this whole situation for the Philadelphia 76ers is just, I don't know where they go from here, because I don't know how you get off. Because right now, I think they're probably looking at it going, this season was failed. Okay, like, duh. Right now, they're 20 and 38, 9-game losing streak. Joel Embiid out for the season. Paul George hasn't played consistently. 6 points per game less than what he was last year. And you're even looking at Jared McCain, the one bright spot at the beginning of the season, out for the season after tearing his, I believe, meniscus at the beginning of the year. All these players, the injuries, the wins, everything. This is a failed season for the Philadelphia 76ers. Therefore, they're probably looking at this season and going, okay, once this is over, they are probably going to run it back. They're probably going to run it back with Embiid and Paul George and see how it looks next year in 25-26, with Embiid making $55 million and Paul George making $51.7 million next year. The Sixers are looking at a scenario where they're going to run it back. But this is where I think, just from what we've seen this season, I don't see either player next year. What's ultimately going to change? Are they going to just magically heal up and be able to go and play the entire season next year? And are they actually going to look the same? So there's two questions there where I think it's evident that the Sixers are in a very precarious situation. It's, can those two players, Embiid and Paul George, can they even stay healthy on the floor at the same time? Can they even stay healthy at the same time? And two, can they look like they did 2 years ago? Plus, when you start asking those questions in the NBA, I think you're done. I think you're done. If you're asking questions about health and you're asking questions, oh, can a player look like this from 2 years ago? How many times in NBA history has a legitimate championship team, a championship contending team, how many times in NBA history have they had to ask, are our players going to stay healthy, and are our players going to look like what they did 2 seasons ago? Most championship teams are just straight up in their primes. That's the prime of their play. that's just what it is. To win a championship is extremely hard in the NBA, going through 4 straight rounds where you have to look different. You have to have your star players playing to an extraordinarily different level. It's hard. And you see here Paul George and Joel Embiid, the way they played this season, their health this season. I don't see a reversion into 3 seasons ago with Paul George and Joel Embiid. I just don't. And that's where the Sixers are just in this bind of this money with Paul George and Joel Embiid and not really having a path towards contention because of how much money they're sucking up and just where the Sixers are on the in terms of their roster right now. Because 26-27, here's your guaranteed contracts. 58 million for Joel Embiid, 54.1 million for Paul George, and 40.8 million for Tyrese Maxey. And honestly, the Tyrese Maxey contract, you're looking at it going, all right, fine. But even his money, is Tyrese Maxey worth 46.3 million or 46.4 million, 28, 29? We're gonna have to see. He's only 24 years old. I love Tyrese Maxey, and he deserves this extension. But is he going to be on that echelon of players at that number at that point in time? 46.4 could actually be a good number in 28, 29, depending on some of the other max deals out there that what they look like at the time. But after that, you don't have any guaranteed money. You have Jared McCain on a club option, so you're probably going to mark that down as guaranteed for 4.4 million. Ricky Council 2.4 million club option that year, and then Adem Bono 2.3 million that season as well. So really, even looking at 26-27, it's like, who are you going to fill around Paul George and Joel Embiid if you're the Sixers to actually make this thing work? I mean, by that time, Andre Drummond is probably done. Quentin Grimes, are you going to extend him after this season? Quentin Grimes is on a team option. What kind of money is he going to be looking for in the offseason? Kelly Oubre is probably not a long-term option whatsoever. Kyle Lowry will be done. Yabusele. This is where some of the Sixers, this is where, again, with all this money caked up in Embiid and Paul George, how are you going to pay Quentin Grimes after this season? Are you going to pay Gershon Yabusele after this season if you're the Philadelphia 76ers? Those are two players who are probably going to end up going elsewhere because they're not going to be just wanting minimum contracts. I mean, those are two players who are, I would say, outplayed the minimum just a bit. Seriously, Quentin Grimes looking for his second deal in the league, so he's going to be looking for a little bit more than a minimum. And Gershon Yabusele is playing on a minimum right now, but he's probably looking for a little bit more than the minimum because he's outplayed that standard this year. So looking at the Sixers, those contracts at the top are just terrible for themselves moving forward, and I don't really see the out for them until 2 seasons from now. And I think really what's going to happen is this season is just going to be the lost season. Sixers are going to tank for their pick. Next season will be kind of the run it back season for the Sixers, where they go, okay, we're running it back with this roster we had last year. We're going to try to maybe swap some things around on the back end, but it's the stars of the show are still going to be Embiid and Paul George next year. The Sixers are going to have to ride with them and see how it works out, even though these players, they're going to be Embiid will be 31, Paul George will be 35 next year. Also, yeah, I just looking at this Embiid contract, so 31, 32, 33, 34 years old, 67 million. So I don't know how Joel Embiid is going to be looking at 34 years old if he can't even stay on court healthy at age 30. But 26-27, that's really when you're looking off. You're really looking to get off of either Paul George or Joel Embiid's money, and who knows, by that time both of them could be gone. But I just don't see a player who I don't see a team out there that wants to deal with either of their money right now. I don't see a team out there who's going, oh, Paul George or Joel Embiid, yeah, they're going to work in with our system and we're going to be able to fit their 50 plus million. I think teams are becoming a little more intelligent nowadays in terms of team building. I think some teams, now it all depends on what owner you have for the team, because you look at a team like the Phoenix Suns, Matt Ishbia kind of came in there, went insane, went and grabbed Kevin Durant from the Brooklyn Nets, then went and traded for Bradley Beal. And that Bradley Beal trade ended up being just horrendous because Bradley Beal is the 5th highest paid player in the association. And Bradley Beal's talent is just not anywhere near that level at all. And that's kind of where Embiid and Paul George are with their numbers at this given point in time. And the Sixers, of course, gave the extension of Joel Embiid, and Paul George signed him as a free agent. But I don't see another team out there looking at either one of those players going, "Oh, they're going to be our missing piece here." And at 50 million, yeah, I don't see that. It's going to have to be a situation where a team who's tanking wants to with cap space. I'll add that in. The team has to be tanking and with cap space. They'll have to take on either Joel Embiid and Paul George money, and that's where this situation just gets completely out of hand because you look at it and go, "What season is that? What season is that? What team is going to want to take on Paul George or Joel Embiid's money next year?" That's why I think the Sixers just have to roll with them next year. But even after that, you're looking at Joel Embiid's money. Is there really a team with cap space that's looking to take Joel Embiid's money for 3 straight years at 58 million, 62.6 million, and then 67.3 million for 3 seasons? I mean, that is hefty. That is a hefty deal. And then Paul George, the same thing, 2 seasons with 54.1 and then 56.6. Those are 2 years where, yeah, you could see the back end. You can see the back end, like, okay, a team might take the back end of those deals, those player options, but I everything before that seems, that is a big deal to take on, especially if players are giving you nothing. I mean, by that time, I'm thinking Paul George and Joel Embiid, they're going to be giving out pretty well nothing. So if you're thinking a team isn't going to fit these players into their books in terms of actually wanting to play them, but even teams who are just going to fit them into their books who just want to pick up some picks from the Philadelphia 76ers and want to just take on Embiid and Paul George money, I I don't that is this thing might not be resolved until 27, 28. I mean, that is 3 seasons from now. That's where that's why I see this whole Sixer situation as just eventually we'll stop talking about it. This is where it's just shocking because we thought, okay, well, maybe if this team could stay healthy, maybe the continuity was there, you could see them making a run in the Eastern Conference. Could they win the East? Who knows? The Celtics, they're still the team to beat in the Eastern Conference, but then you have the Cavs, the Knicks there. The Cavs weren't thought of before the season, but you're certainly thinking about the Knicks out there and looking at the Knicks and Sixers going, oh, the Sixers are actually a little bit deeper of a team. The Knicks might have the more talented players at the top, but the Sixers, they're actually deeper than the New York Knicks. Well, now the Sixers, they're 12th. They're not making a play in. They're 12th in the East. They're not making even a play in run at this point in time. And next season, we'll have to see what the Sixers come out with. And I feel bad for guys like Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain and maybe a top 6 pick from this year's draft. The Sixers could end up with those 3 young players because Paul George and Joel Embiid, it's going to be their show next year, and this is where the Sixers should probably be looking more towards a young reset, but they just can't. They just can't. If they have Embiid and Paul George out there, they have to ride with those guys, and with their contracts right now, I just don't see other teams picking them up in the future. I'm sure that it can happen because we've seen guys in the past like Russell Westbrook, John Wall, they've been moved when it seemed impossible. But even at that point in time, like John Wall, specifically talking about his situation, the Rockets just couldn't move him. Just ate his money, couldn't move him. Really set him back multiple years. The Rockets it did, and I think that's kind of what we're looking at with the Philadelphia 76ers. And it's just a shame to some degree because they really did have some of the golden trove, the treasure chest, or the treasure trove. I don't know. We should maybe throw away that phrase. But the Sixers had a golden opportunity to build a contender, whether it was last offseason or even in off seasons prior with all the assets they had and just the talent they were able to put around Joel Embiid. But ultimately, ah, just you look at their situation now and go, wow, I think the window of contention is done with Joel Embiid. I don't see how he gets himself a ring unless he's really hooked on to another team somewhere else at the end. But just this money for the Sixers, it's this is rough. Rough. I mean, 26, 27 is maybe the first year you could see the Sixers getting out of where they're at right now. But even then, I think 26, 27, you kind of look at it and go, well, that would be a year in which they're actually trying to reset, and they might not even be able to reset that year. So that's where you're looking at more 27, 28. And that's, again, where you look down the line and go, this thing right now that's affecting the Sixers this season in 24-25, the extension with Joel Embiid, the contract with Paul George, this might affect them all the way down the line past 29-30. Because by 29-30, will the Sixers, are they going to be in a point of contention if they're trying to reset in 27-28 and 28-29? The Sixers, they're going to go this way before they start going this way again. And that's where right now 29-30, that's 5 to 6 years from now, they still might not be in a place of contention just because they're trying to get rid of Paul George and Joel Embiid's money and then rebuild the team around that. So the Sixers, they're certainly in a little bit of a bind. Here with more than a little bit of a bind with where they're at now. But the big news here on this broadcast, broke on the live stream actually, is Joel Embiid out for the season, rehabbing his left knee. Joel Embiid does not make it to the month of March. The Philadelphia 76ers currently on a 9-game losing streak with a record of 20 and 38, 18 games below 500. The Philadelphia 76ers are 12th in the Eastern Conference right now and own the 6th best odds at the number 1 pick. And the Sixers, interesting note here, as we talked about earlier in the live stream, the Sixers, they owe the Oklahoma City Thunder their 2025 first-round pick from the Al Horford deal, the Al Horford money-shedding deal back in 2020. Sixers owe the Oklahoma City Thunder their 2025 first-round pick if it does not fall between selections 1 and 6. If the pick falls in between selections 1 and 6, the Sixers keep the pick. If it goes 7 through 30, the Oklahoma City Thunder get the pick. And if the pick does not convey this year to the Thunder get the 2026 Philadelphia 76ers first round pick, in which is protected 1 through 4. And if that does not convey, then it rolls over to 2027 and so on and so forth. We don't have to get too far into that. But the Philadelphia 76ers right now, it seems like their season is over. Their history has been turned upside down with Paul George and Joel Embiid. And looks like they're likely going to have to run it back with those two guys next year. And then after that, probably going to be looking at getting off their money, even if they can 2 seasons from now. What I'm going to say about this is the Sixers are kind of in the purgatory of mediocrity at this moment, if not bad team. Even if they tank, I don't see what is the result of that if they can't get off Paul George and Joel Embiid's money. And that's where I think this situation with Paul George and Joel Embiid could end up affecting the Sixers for maybe the next half decade, if not beyond that. And from a Celtics fan perspective, it's hey, well, that's just what happens. But from the NBA community, the Joel Embiid fan community, the Sixers, the Philadelphia fan community, not a great situation. Not a great situation whatsoever. But that is going to do it for me here on this live stream. So I know it said post game show. I know we're doing, we did a little post game down here, kind of talked about this game a little bit. But this was ultimately a live stream to talk about the Philadelphia 76ers and some of the logistics going on there. Jared McCain and Tyrese Maxey, they're probably the future in Philly, but I would say those two guys, are they even going to be, I mean, they're both smaller guards. You need big wings in the NBA. We'll say you need big guys in the NBA more than smaller guards. Both those guys are smaller guards. We'll have to see. Jared McCain can come back the same next season coming off a knee injury. And if Tyrese Maxey, that's actually one of the best assets the Sixers own at this point in time is Tyrese Maxey, because he has an all right contract, not the best contract in the world. He has an all right contract, actually is a borderline all-star, and will show up on a nightly basis, whereas Joel Embiid, Paul George, they're not even trade assets at this point. They have no value to any other team. And that is certainly an unfortunate story in which has hit that ball club and that city of Philadelphia. But hey, they got they got other things they won this year. So I'm sure they're looking more towards that. But that is going to do it for me here on the Celtics Talk Weekly post-game show. Now let's cue up the music here real quick because I can never hear it. But that's going to do it for me here on the Celtics Talk Weekly post-game show. The Boston Celtics overcoming the Philadelphia 76ers 124-104 in Philadelphia, coming off the All-Star break, the 2025 All-Star break. Boston Celtics get the second half of the season started well with a great win on the road against the Sixers. Always feels great beating the Philadelphia 76ers. The Celtics do that coming out of 2025 All-Star break, and now look towards the rest of the season for their back-to-back championship run. But we will have you guys covered for all of those games moving forward. Of course, that's going to do it for me today here on the Celtics Talk Weekly post-game show. I am your host, Seamus Zarlingo. Thank you all for listening. And as I always say, go Celtics.